The world was at war for the second time in less than 3 decades. Europe torn apart, Asia crumbling, and America just joining the battle. But not all Americans could defend the free world. Millions were not free to fight, even though they were willing to die for the cause and a nation that wouldn't treat them as equals. But some rose above. This is their story, the Montford Marines.
Samuel Berksteiner didn't go to school with white children. John White was only allowed to drink from the colored water fountain. Reginald Brown's grandmother never held the right to vote in the United States of America. Willie Outler's great-grandfather was a slave. But so thirsty were these men for the promise of America that they were willing to shed their blood on Pacific battlefields and earn a place, finally, at the American table. They were the Montford Marines. The year was 1942. You could buy a new house for $3,770, a new car for $920, a gallon of gas for 15 cents, and a bottle of Coca-Cola for 5 cents. It was a very different time in our nation's history. The races did not mix. Nearly a century after gaining their freedom, blacks were still considered second-class citizens. They had no rights and were not seriously considered for jobs other than domestics and heavy laborers. In spite of the harsh reality of racism, blacks were drafted to fight for a nation where they had no rights. The government was beginning what it considered to be an experiment, allowing blacks into the United States Marine Corps.
Fast forward 70 years, and the year is 2012, and those Marines who no one wanted are now a part of the legacy of the greatest generation, the World War II veterans. Greetings, everyone. In the coastal empire and low country, I'm reporting from the nation's capital, specifically the breathtakingly beautiful World War II Memorial Monument. As you know, 4 distinguished Savannahans earned the Congressional Gold Medal, one of our nation's highest civilian honors. Montford Marine Samuel Berksteiner, Reginald Brown, John White, and Willie Outler. Like most heroes, their journey to the history books did not come easy.
Excited about the challenge of becoming the first black Marines, these men knew there would be many obstacles along the way, but they had no way of knowing exactly what they were getting into or how many others were counting on their success.
In the face of intolerance and discrimination, the Montford Marines served our country with honor and distinction. And for that, they are true heroes. Heroes to each and every one of us here today.
You served our country at a time when it took an extra dose of patriotism to do so. An extra dose of courage, because all of the freedoms that you were fighting for were not afforded to everyone in our country at that time.
As the Montford Marines honoring American heroes continues, what young men from right here in our community faced every day to wear the uniform. On June 25, 1941, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt issued Executive Order number 8802, establishing the fair employment practice that began to erase discrimination in the armed forces. A board was then organized to study the integration of blacks assigned to different areas. About a year later, in 1942, President Roosevelt authorized the presidential directive that gave blacks an opportunity to be recruited into the Marine Corps. Unlike the white recruits, the black recruits were not sent to Parris Island, South Carolina, or San Diego, California, the Marines' traditional recruit training facilities. Instead, black Marines were segregated and went through basic training at Montford Point, a facility located at Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. From 1942 to 1949, Montford Point made nearly 20,000 black Marines.
Breaking the color barrier in the Marine Corps took nothing less than perseverance, patriotism, and courage of extraordinary proportions.
Although the Corps was forced by President Roosevelt to accept black recruits, it wasn't forced to treat them equally.
Even the Commandant of the Marine Corps, Major General Thomas Holcomb, didn't believe blacks should be in the Corps. He said blacks had no right to serve as Marines, and went on to say, and I quote, "If it were a question of having a Marine Corps of 5,000 whites or 250,000 Negroes, I would rather have the whites." If the leader of the Corps said that on the record, that must have made other officers who felt the same more comfortable about resisting the presidential order to integrate.
White drill sergeants tried to break these trainees, who they saw as inferior to the white recruits they had. But the men at Montford Point were made of the same tough stuff as other leathernecks. They proved themselves in their training.
Between the years of 1942 and 1949, trained in remarkably difficult conditions. Instead of standard barracks, like the ones their white counterparts slept in at Camp Lejeune, the living quarters at Montford Point were more like overcrowded huts, where a single stove supplied heat for more than 40 men. Yet most just to brush these things aside. As one of the men put it years later, we were so gung-ho and patriotic, we weren't concerned at all about what we were going to do. We just wanted to get out there and fight.
They got the call to fight in the Pacific Islands during World War II. They were anxious to prove they were capable of defending our nation just like the other U.S. troops as soon as they hit the ground. Many were disappointed as they waited for their chance to fight alongside the white Marines.
Restricted to training for support roles, African American Marines had to wait for their chance to prove themselves on the battlefield. But the chance finally came in the Pacific Theater, where many saw combat in some of the bloodiest battles of World War II, including Iwo Jima, Saipan, and Okinawa, and carried out their duties with great courage and heroism.
Now, they not only helped defeat tyranny overseas, they thoroughly discredited a poisonous philosophy deeply held and long defended by elites here at home. For generations, this philosophy justified bigotry, racism, and segregation. This philosophy is why allowing blacks to serve in the Marine Corps was called an experiment. If it was an experiment, it didn't last very long. Before the end of the war, the Marine Corps Commandant at the time said the experiment was over. The men trained at Montford Point were, and I'll quote, Marines, period.
The initial report of the Marine Corps' hierarchy was to discharge these black Marines after the war, returning them to civilian life and leaving the Marine Corps an all-white organization. But their exceptional performance on the battlefield changed their hearts and minds. In July 1948, President Harry Truman issued Executive Order number 9981, which ended segregation in the Marine Corps. Then in September 1949, Montford Marine Camp was deactivated after 7 years of segregated operation. On April 19, 1974, it was renamed Camp Johnson in honor of the late Sergeant Major Gilbert H. Hashmark Johnson, who was one of the first blacks to join the Corps, a distinguished Montford Point drill instructor, and a veteran of World War II and the Korean War. The camp remains the only Marine Corps installation named in honor of an African American. As Montford Point Marines honoring American heroes continues, we'll hear firsthand accounts from the heroes who call Savannah home. They open up and talk about the often brutal training that they endured and what kept them going. Montford Point Marine Base, a bittersweet place for black Marines as they fought for the right to wear the uniform.
People got to remember they didn't want us in there.
Right.
And they made it known that they didn't want us in there.
Well, you was invading precious territory. Never had a black Marine before, so you were in that territory.
That's putting it lightly. In the 1940s, even the Commandant of the Marine Corps made it clear he didn't want blacks as Marines. Most of their drill sergeants also resented President Franklin Roosevelt's order to begin what they called an experiment, opening the doors to blacks.
When these men walked through the gates at Montford Point in my home state of North Carolina in the 1940s, you came young, brave, and committed to serving a country that did not yet appreciate the sacrifices. A country that measured a warrior, measured a man, not by his courage or his dedication, but by the color of his skin.
The Montford Point Marines rode in the back of the troop train, ate at separate lunch counters, and used different bathrooms, and even sometimes different drinking fountains. They were trained to fight injustice overseas. Meanwhile, they suffered discrimination every day.
Not only from civilians, but also from the white Marines.
They would create a scene so that the local police are getting power. And then that would throw reflection on us back at the camp. See?
Such a beautiful monument, but back in 1942, when the Montford Point Marines began, There was nothing beautiful about America and what was going on for blacks. In fact, the government called their unit an experiment. But those young recruits worked hard and did their very best to become among the few and the proud. And when they got their call for World War II, they ended up in the Pacific.
You got to remember, Don, the Corps was so segregated, and there was such discriminatory practice in there. A lot of us didn't get a chance to see actual combat.
All of us was gung-ho, and we wanted to prove that we were Marines.
Reginald Brown was one of a few blacks who saw combat during World War II. He says he knew working with the white Marines would not be easy.
Well, when we first joined them, they were hostile. But when they got a couple of those beakheads and couldn't handle it, and we had to go in and secure it for them so they could go in the front echelon and do the fighting. But they thought we were the best thing to eat.
In World War II, America fought two enemies who told their soldiers that they were supermen because of their race. The racial experiments of Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan have failed utterly. And they failed in part due to the bayonets, bombs, and bullets of black American warfighters.
After returning from the war, putting their lives on the line defending our nation, they thought society would have viewed them differently.
I never will forget, I came home on a furlough and walking down Broughton Street, had my Marine uniform on, and the Broughton Street then was the metropolis. Hey, oh, look at that inn wearing a uniform. And I really struck. I really struck, proud of my uniform. And I'm so proud of it because it changed me from a meek little boy to a man.
But Samuel Bergsteiner didn't take that racist treatment lightly.
When I came out, and I found the situation from a social standpoint had not changed. Now, I was angry that I had to go through what I had to go through when I came out, because the same thing that I left was still in force.
They admit both the positive and negative experiences had a profound effect on their lives. They hope young people today will learn from their struggles.
Well, I hope that the youth of tomorrow stop and think before they react, and in order not to look for that goal, the goal, G-O-L-D, but look for G-O-A-L. Set a goal in life. Get an education, because you gain an education. You can take your freedom away, but you can't take your knowledge away.
As we continue, Montford Point Marines honoring American heroes from the nation's capital, we'll hear from the self-proclaimed tough guy of the group, Reginald Brown. He says the streets of Savannah toughened him up, and he used that strength to make it through boot camp and beyond.
The war taught me how to be a man. It taught me how to think, plan, and just what I wanted in life, or what I wanted out of life. Not just wandering around and let it happen.
Don't let his smile fool you. Reginald Brown was always a tough guy, so it really didn't surprise anyone that he volunteered at 17 and a half to join the Marine Corps at a time when the Corps was just opening up to blacks. It was never like him to take the easy way out.
I grew up with everybody always telling me, you can't do this and you can't do that and you shouldn't do it.
People said he couldn't do it, and he was determined to prove them wrong. When he arrived at Montford Point, he was shocked to find there was no military base.
Select a place in the swamp near the river. So we had to go help clear it out. No buildings, we had tents. Little pup tents at that.
The training was brutal from some white instructors who didn't want blacks there and felt as if they, as the instructors, were being punished by being assigned to train them. The pressure was getting to some of the recruits. They were threatening to quit because of the conditions. Even though Brown was the youngest, he became the voice of reason, often encouraging others to stick to it. He remembers them saying,
I'm gonna do something so they're gonna put me out here. Just don't talk like that. You came here to do a job.
Brown says the training could be downright inhumane at times, but not enough for him to give up on his dream of one day wearing that uniform.
The more he threw at us, the more we took. And when he found out that they just couldn't beat us down, then they started bringing in some guys that were already in the Navy for so many years and put them in as DIs and whatnot.
Those guys were the first black drill instructors. After basic training, Brown got the call to go to war. His unit boarded the train for Camp Pendleton, California. Little did they know, they would have to fight for their lives long before they left American soil.
Every time we stopped in a town to eat, we had to fight. Fight the locals. People in the restaurant were sitting around the back. And started in Florence, South Carolina. We followed all the way through Mississippi until we got to Texas and Dallas, Texas. We just had a plum showdown. See, we was at a disadvantage. We had rifles, but we didn't have no ammunition.
Eventually, they made it to Pendleton and shipped out for the South Pacific Islands. The first time Brown came face to face with the white Marines was on the battlefield. His unit was one of the few black units to see combat.
We were supposed to be a supply depot. We were supposed to supply whatever the other troops needed. That meant the white troops. But after the white troops got where they couldn't handle the situation and MacArthur took over the South Pacific too, that's when we got a break to go to the front line. Because they gave us the dirty part of it, but it was still better than shining shoes and carrying people their food. They didn't like it at first, but when we started saving their butts, then they liked it.
Brown remained in the Marines for 10 years and also fought in the Korean War. By that time, the Corps was completely integrated. All of the Marines were treated as equals. Brown remains very proud of his service. He believes there are great lessons in the Montford Point story for young people today.
I'd like for young folks to get out of the whole situation, determination. Don't let nothing hold you back. Try it. If you fail, try something else. You gotta succeed in something, because God didn't make no fool, right? So you find your spot.
Montford Point was just the beginning of a long and successful career for this honoree. John White followed the advice of another history maker when he selected the Marine Corps. You'll be surprised, too. When we come right back, we'll have your answer and explain why he followed the order.
I've always wanted to change the world, change history.
I would want them to know that he's a loving man, he's kind, don't get me emotional, he's generous. You know, to a fault, he is generous. There has not been a day that we didn't go without food, we didn't have shelter, we didn't have clothes on our back. But most of all, I want people to understand that God has blessed him richly.
Salathia White is still Daddy's little girl. She's describing a man most Savannaians know, John White. He was the first black police officer in Georgia and a member of the original 9, who were the Savannah Police Department's first black policemen. Those brave men joined a department that was not quite ready for their arrival in 1947, long before the modern-day civil rights movement gained momentum. While his family was proud, they knew what he was doing was very dangerous, especially considering it was during the days of segregation.
He walked out the house as a man, but he had to go to work as a boy. And, you know, it's just amazing the things that a person had to endure, you know, for all their adult life to be the person that they are now.
Her father often recalls the horror stories about the injustices in society and the police department back in the 40s toward the new black recruits. But White rarely, if ever, spoke to anyone about his military career, even though it was the kind of career that changed the United States Marine Corps.
I'm a small cog in the wheel of success. I cause men to become much more greater than me. And I'm glad that I'm able to have them to step on my shoulder and to reach their height. I'm the proudest man in the world.
This American hero, who is still basking in the glory of receiving the Congressional Gold Medal, admits the road to the highest civilian honor did not come easy. White was drafted back in 1942. At the time, civil rights leader Reverend Ralph Mark Gilbert was encouraging all of the young men to pick the Marine Corps, since it was just opening up to blacks.
The Marine Corps said they wanted most of the youngsters from the South. They didn't want them from the North, because some had lived in an unsegregated area, and they would create a problem. It was real difficult because segregation was rampant, and we were called names everywhere we went. In Jacksonville, well, you had the white, you had the black, you had the policeman who was standing by and hollering in this.
White and other recruits believed there was a plan to make the black recruits lash out. That would get them in trouble with the law and the Marine Corps. But those tremendous obstacles made those men stronger.
Made us more determined because of the fact that we were young and we had seen the resentment. And we want to prove that we are much better than our counterpart.
They worked together to keep the unit strong. They survived World War II. When White returned home and left the Marines, he had a long celebrated career as a police officer. He maintains, even at the age of 87.
I'll do it again if possible. And because it made a man out of me.
White's daughter is not only proud of the man her father was to her family, but also the man he was in the community.
He is magnificent. Sickness, but magnificent. Many men in their 60s, in late 50s, they would often tell me that if it wasn't for him intervening in their lives when he did, they probably would have been in jail, would have been a career criminal, or would have been dead, because he stopped them. He had a profound effect on many people.
More than 20,000 men became Marines at Montford Point, North Carolina, and they had a profound effect on not only the Marine Corps, but also our nation.
Recognition of their accomplishments is long overdue. Still, for many of these men, it was never about gaining recognition. It was about defending the nation they loved and paving a path for the generations of African American men and women who would follow them into the Marine Corps.
When Montford Point Marines Honoring American Heroes continues, we'll show you how our nation is saying thank you for a job well done. The United States Capitol Building, one of the most recognizable structures in the country. Did you know that slaves helped build it? The federal government rented slaves from their owners in 1793 to build the Capitol Building and the city of Washington that was little more than dirt roads then. The government wanted the building ready in 1800 when Congress moved from Philadelphia to Washington. Then, more than 200 years later, on December 18, 2007, Congress named the Capitol Visitor Center's central space Emancipation Hall to recognize the contributions of those slaves. How fitting now that Congress would honor the Montford Marines in this very place.
Well, you could certainly feel the excitement, enthusiasm, pride, and energy all day long as more than 100 members of the Montford Marines made their way into America's history in a very big way.
It is truly one of the greatest honors of my career to be here as a U.S. Senator today to recognize the most heroic and courageous veterans in our nation's history. In fact, I can think of no group more deserving of this Congressional Gold Medal than the Montford Marines.
They were trained to fight injustice overseas. Meanwhile, they suffered discrimination every day. They were trained to fight tyranny abroad, but their friends and family suffered oppression here at home.
All the men we recognize today secured a permanent place of honor in our national memory. For doing so, in the face of mistreatment and injustice, we owe them an even greater measure of respect and gratitude. They are among the greatest of the greatest generation.
But what's uniquely American about what you tolerated and endured is what you accomplished and the way in which you overcame the prevailing attitudes of your day. With persistence, with grit, with courage, and in doing so, you ensured that this nation could no longer ignore the necessity of living up to the ideals that it's founded upon.
When most people think about the fight for equality, they think about this great man, the late Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. But actually, the Montford Marines were fighting for equality and civil rights when Dr. King was only 13 years old.
As we recognize these Montford Marines as part of a long drive to break down barriers in the military and in our country. And coming together in the middle of the 20th century, when you did, you shared the pioneer spirit of all those who fought for civil rights, of the national movement to realize the promise that we are all created equal.
This hall was packed with thousands of members of Congress, Marines, families, and supporters joining in the ceremony that has been 70 years in the making. House Speaker John Boehner presented the Congressional Gold Medal to Montford Pointer William McDowell.
You all did what some of us thought was impossible. Once again, you've made history.
The Commandant had witnessed firsthand a black Marines fighting a hand-to-hand combat during the Battle of Saipan. He saw what other white Marines saw. And he saw what Montford Marines already knew, that they had the right stuff, that they could live by a code, and they could meet the high calling of the Eagle, the Globe, and the Anchor.
After many years of lobbying lawmakers in Washington, D.C., and watching others receive the Congressional Gold Medal, these Marines will finally be honored with one of the highest civilian awards.
This bill was probably the most bipartisan bill we passed and gonna pass in this Congress. And you needed 290 signatures in order to get it agended in the House, and you needed about 90 in the Senate. And so when we got it passed in the House, I thought my work was over. And General Amos called me and said, "Do you know anybody in the Senate?" I said, "Sir, what happens when failure is not an option, sir? You get it done, sir."
As the Montford Marines honoring American heroes continues, their hard work pays off. They are the grandfathers and great-grandfathers now. But 70 years ago, these men from all walks of life were in their prime, proud, young, strong, and eager to answer the nation's call. They come from all over the country and became known as the Montford Marines, among the few, the proud. On June 28, 2012, they were no less excited or eager to fill this parade field at the Marine Barracks in Washington, D.C. But the way they gathered is different, very different. These days, many of these brave men could not even dream of making the trip alone. They are between the ages of 81 and 90. As you look around the field of honor, you see many of the once leaders of their generation not able to even get around on their own. They have come armed with wheelchairs and portable oxygen to sustain them. Their sons, daughters, grandchildren, and even younger Marines are at their sides, carefully handling these American heroes, making sure they get where they need to be and are as comfortable as possible. As the Marine Corps band takes to the field, these Marines, even the most feeble, did their best to stand at attention and salute. It has been a long road to this place, where these men make the history book once again.
A year and a half ago, Sergeant Major Kent, who was a 16th Sergeant Major, and I attended a very small reunion at Camp Pendleton in the base theater of original Montford Pointers. And when we walked out that day, not understanding, not knowing history about Montford Point Marines, I looked at Sergeant Major Kent and I said, we've got to do something about this.
That something turned into many Marines working along with Congress to make this recognition a reality. General James Amos, Commandant of the Marine Corps, says it would have never happened without two strong women who sealed the deal.
Representative Corrine Brown from the great state of Florida, she spearheaded this in the House of Representatives. And my particular senator from the great state of North Carolina, Kay Hagan, pushed it across the goal line in the Senate. Thank you very much, ladies. Thank you.
That touchdown, a unanimous vote from Congress to award the Montford Pointers a Congressional Gold Medal. Among the 6 generals presenting gold medals to these pioneers, Savannah's own, Lieutenant General Walter Gaskin.
Today, they've proved that they had the right stuff.
The generals carefully placed the medals around the necks of each of the 400 survivors, taking time with each Marine to show them their profound gratitude for their service.
Willie J. Outler.
I feel like Jordan. I feel important. I feel like I'm American citizen. First player.
Samuel F. Berksteiner.
I feel elated. I feel good after all that we went through.
John A. White.
I'm exhausted due to the fact that we've been waiting for many years. It has been a wonderful experience for me.
Reginald W. Brown.
Well, I mean, it showed that we did contribute something to our country. And today it was proven. Without this medal, it would have been forgotten.
Hampton, South Carolina's James Moore was all smiles that day, looking like the picture of health.
We live in the greatest country in the world, don't forget that. And I'm willing to go back now as old as I am to help for our freedom.
Sadly, a few short days after receiving his medal, James Moore passed away. What a blessing that he lived to be a part of this historic moment in time. He and the others were on top of the world, and nothing could have contained their excitement or their families.
I'm ecstatic. I'm really overjoyed. I'm proud for this day for him.
I feel really great, really great. It's an honor for my father to be receiving this award, and I'm just very proud of him.
He's just a wonderful, and all his kids and his grandkids are just proud to know that he's part of history.
It's just awesome. It's just really awesome. But God has been good to me.
That pride is also shared by everyone who wears the uniform.
To watch those medals be put around your neck, I'll tell you what, it brings tears to all Marines wear this cloth today?
I am overwhelmed. This is so much emotional to me because today represents the closing of a circle. Finally, these men who sacrificed a lot, gave a lot for their country, for their people, for their communities, have been recognized for that sacrifice. So this is a very, very special day for all of us.
What the honorees did 70 years ago changed the Corps, opening up doors of opportunity for people from all walks of life. Their courage left a lasting legacy.
This is the legacy of Montford Point. Unflinching devotion to other Marines, loyalty to the Corps, courage under any and all circumstances, and an example, now etched in gold, to any Marine of any color. Thank God for the Marines of Montford Point.
When the Montford Point Marines Honoring American Heroes continues, we'll show you how the circle is now complete. You could feel the electricity in the air as 400 Montford Point Marines waited for the moment many thought they would not live to see, the day they would finally get their Congressional Gold Medals, making the honor even more meaningful, watching something else they never thought they would see.
Many of them said that during their lifetime that they never expected to see a general, let alone an officer, because when they got out, there were no African American officers. But to them, it is the coming true.
Montford Pointer John White will never forget that feeling.
I had reached the height. No man, it's just like going to the moon. I can't describe my feeling. I think I said I was exalted or something, but I had reached the height, and I felt so good.
To them, Lieutenant General Walter Gaskin and others getting the chance to wear the uniform and climb the ranks made everything they had endured all worth it.
See, these are Marines. Their legacy goes beyond the collar bearer. They fought for the United States of America, And you know, the enemy didn't care what color their skin was, you know, and they did that knowing that if they believe, if they got the opportunity to demonstrate their skills, their capabilities, their patriotism, their love for country, that America would embrace them and give to them what was their birthright, and that is all the rights and freedoms of being an American. And they proved beyond that. Matter of fact, one of our commandants said that the experiment is over. They are Marines, period. And that came true today. Today we put an exclamation mark to that statement.
General Gaskin personally greeted and thanked each of these men.
For me personally, you know, I stand on the shoulders of these guys. And as I was going around today giving them their medals and shaking their hands, I said to them, thank you for wanting to be a Marine so I could be a Marine, because you paved the way and I stand on your shoulders. I said to them that I hope that I prove worthy of your sacrifice and all that you give. And that's been the culmination of all the good things that happened. They persevered, they sacrificed, and they fought for the right to fight. And that what makes them so very, very special to all of us.
Making this historic day even more touching, General Gaskin presenting the medals to 4 men from his hometown.
Personally, I am just overwhelmed. I am just so happy. And the special treat with that, 4 of the recipients today was from Savannah, Georgia, my hometown. Grew up all throughout my area where my family is, and you know, being a Savannian and having them say a Montford Pointer, or original Marine, this is just overwhelming. And full circle, I had a chance for those whose shoulders I stand, those who were pathfinders, for every African American who became a Marine, a chance to give them an award, a medal that recognized their sacrifice and service and their commitment to corps and country. And I am just as proud as I can be and happy that I had the opportunity to do that.
That gesture was not lost among the honorees.
Like I told them, this was one of the greatest moments of my life. To see one of my fellow Marines and from my hometown give me a medal. It was touching.
So moving and frankly unforgettable for those of us who had the opportunity to witness the Montford Marines finally receive these Congressional Gold Medals. And just like the inscription reads, we honor them for their sacrifice, perseverance, and courage. They're a small group of giants who ultimately changed our way of life.
Today, the Corps is stronger because of your service. Today, America is greater because of your sacrifices. God bless the Montford Marines.